All right, Robby, what's on your radar?
Throughout the pandemic, no other government official has seized the spotlight quite like Dr. Anthony Fauci, the White House's coronavirus advisor. For decades, Fauci has been a respected name in the field of epidemiology, serving with quiet distinction as director of the National Institute of the Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Now, for Democrats, many liberals, and the mainstream media, Fauci is practically a living saint, an avatar of Team Blue's Trust the Science mantra. Fauci clearly enjoys his newly minted celebrity status. He threw out the first pitch on baseball's opening day last year, and the power he's accrued as the federal government's foremost COVID-19 expert. But perhaps Dr. Fauci isn't quite the hero he's made out to be. Perhaps he's just another federal bureaucrat with a long track record of making health-related policy calls. Some of them very good, some of them less so. Yesterday, Republican Senator Rand Paul referred Fauci to the Department of Justice. Paul wants Merrick Garland, Biden's attorney general, to investigate the doctor for potentially lying to Congress. At issue is whether federal officials, under Fauci's purview and direction, funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in Wuhan, China. The origins of COVID-19 are still a mystery, and there isn't nearly enough evidence to say whether it's more likely that COVID arose in nature or leaked from a Chinese lab. But there are enough coincidences to make rational minds want to know whether our own government paid for research conducted in China that contributed to, or even caused, this terrible pandemic. Now, Fauci has loudly denied that the institute funded gain-of-function research in China and accused Senator Paul of distorting the matter during a tense exchange in front of Congress. Let's watch.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans, right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about.
Despite Fauci's protestations, we know that the National Health Institute made a $3.7 million grant to an organization called the EcoHealth Alliance in 2014. 600,000 of which were sent to that Wuhan lab to study bat coronaviruses. That's confirmed. So when Fauci says that his agency did not fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, he's essentially resorting to semantics, the question of whether the specific research meets the definition of gain-of-function, i.e. altering the molecular structure of a virus in order to make it more transmissible and more deadly. Fauci has expressed supreme confidence that the Wuhan lab did not engage in this kind of research, though one wonders how he can be so sure. The Chinese government is notoriously authoritarian and opaque, and suppressed news of the virus from the rest of the world until it was too late. Was Fauci in the lab, watching what was done to those bats? Keep in mind that the U.S. government loses and misuses funds all the time. In 2018, an internal audit found that the Pentagon had lost track of $800 million. If that sounds like a lot, consider that the Defense Department once misplaced more than $1 trillion. That department's record-keeping is so chaotic, according to the New York Times, that Congress advised the agency's auditors not to bother even trying to audit them. Our federal government is vast and bloated and bureaucratic, and officials are frequently caught misleading the people about what the government is doing and why and where the money went. Fauci may not be lying, and even if he is, don't expect Biden's Justice Department to investigate him, but he does come across as hopelessly naive to put complete faith in either the U.S. government's accounting or the Chinese government's transparency. In any case, he's a doctor, not a national security expert. If Fauci is lying, it would not be a huge surprise. That's because the doctor has previously admitted to misleading the public about the herd immunity threshold.
Let's talk about some of the solutions in terms of coronavirus. You acknowledged to the New York Times that you've moved the goalposts in terms of what it would take to reach so-called herd immunity in the United States. Here's what you said. You said, when polls said about when polls said only about half of all Americans would take a vaccine, I was saying herd immunity would take 70 to 75%. Then when newer surveys said 60% or more would take it, I thought I can nudge this up a bit. So I went to 80, 85. And then you go on to say that it may be as high as 90%. So my question is, why weren't you straight with the American people about this to begin with?
This was done in service of a noble lie. Fauci thought he had to give the people false hope because they weren't ready for the truth. Well, what's to say he's not doing the same thing now?
You know, he's told a lot of noble lies, hasn't he? I mean, when you look back at his career, when he says things like, well, I just didn't want the masks to run out for the frontline workers, and so that's why I said people didn't need masks. And and then you show this where he says, well, I want to kind of nudge it up, to 90% or something. At the end of the day, I don't care what Fauci wants to call it. If he wants to call it gain of function or not, I don't really care what the label is that he sticks on whatever that science was that they were doing. We don't want scientists to take animal viruses and make them more transmissible to humans. We don't want that. Whatever you call that.
Reasonably,
right?
We don't want that. We're not crazy for not wanting that. You know what bugs me about Fauci, and I'm trying to be very careful in my criticism. I don't think he should face some trial for treason right now or something. We need to know. We're still in the needing to know more information stage. I've agreed with a lot of his recommendations over the pandemic, and I've disagreed with a lot of others. But he's an expert on viruses, on the science behind disease. When he says things like, oh, yeah, well, I misled people about the herd immunity threshold, what I thought, because they weren't ready to hear it. And then later I changed it because I thought then they could hear it because different numbers of people want to take the vaccines. That's not really, that's not his expertise. That's the science of how to motivate public opinion. So it's so annoying because we'll hear, well, you can't have an opinion on anything relating to COVID unless you're an epidemiologist, unless you're a scientist.
Right.
Just listen to those scientists. But those people are, verging off their area of expertise into public opinion, into national security, into constitutional law, whether masks, mandates, vaccines, all those things can be required. They're opining, and Fauci is more guilty of this than anyone else, opining on anything under the sun. But then they're trying to silence the rest of us. I mean, not literally, but saying we should shut up with our questions because we're not experts. But they're not experts on any of that.
Right. Yeah. And, my biggest thing with Fauci that really, kind of irks me about the whole thing is just, again, unwilling to admit where he has gone wrong, unwilling to be humble about it and face the American people and just say, look, there's just a lot we don't know. And that's kind of been my beef about everything that has gone on with the pandemic is just these officials being unwilling to say, we just don't know. And so we're going to try this, or we're thinking maybe that, but, we'll learn more, we'll tell you more as we know more. They talk more in definitive authoritarian terms of authoritative terms, saying, this is what it is. And, when it comes to Fauci in particular, it's just, you're right. The left has turned him into this sort of saint that can't do anything wrong. And then when he misleads the American public, again, they're demonizing and saying, well, the reason why people are losing faith is because people on YouTube, people on Facebook. It's because of Fox News. That's why they're losing faith and they're not doing what the officials say. And it's like, well, maybe you should look at the officials themselves and see how much they've flip-flopped and how many noble lies they've told.
Yeah, they wanted Facebook to not allow anyone to post questions about the origins of COVID. They didn't want anyone to suggest, the administration didn't want this. Our federal government didn't want Facebook to let its users write on Facebook that they thought maybe COVID came from a lab. And then a few weeks ago, start of the summer, sometime around then, Facebook changed that policy after enough people had said, you know what, we non-right-wing people, we're in the science consensus or whatever, and we have some real questions about this. So then Facebook changed its mind. But they were doing that at the behest of the government, at the behest of this this Fauci circle of people who, again, they get some things right and they get some things wrong, but we have to pretend they're literally perfect people. These kinds of people, Fauci in particular, have begun to lose my confidence because of the lack of humility. More than begun, much more than begun.
Yeah. And also one thing that I think people need to be looking into, somebody needs to look into, and I'm sure many people have, which is, the connection between Fauci and funding and China in particular. What kinds of funds were they sending to China? Obviously, people are looking into this, but it needs to be explored a little bit more because, one of the problems with China is that they don't have the same regulations and ethics that we have when it comes to scientific experimentation.
Right.
And, Fauci knows this. A lot of the scientists in the U.S., a lot of wealthy people and pharmaceutical companies, they know this, so they do a lot of funding for scientific research in China where they can get away with a lot more. And, that leads to potentially devastating consequences as we see.
How often have we funded some dissident group in the Middle East? Have we trained or sent weapons to, and then later they're being used against us and we're confused? That happens all the time. So it's something to be wary about what money, what we're doing with it, that people deserve to know. Coming up, Inez Stepman and Andrew Feldman are here with us for Team Rising. Stick around.